Hey, Bridgetown Church, great to see all of you. I'm here with Dr. Tim Mackie, who is a dear friend, wonderful human being, also a Hebrew professor and the co-creator of the Bible Project right around the corner, which I think is one of the best things in our city. Tim's just a brilliant mind and a great, wonderful person, and we're in our fall practice and series around what church tradition has called the three enemies of the soul: the world, the flesh, and the devil. So we've spent several weeks teaching on the devil, like you do.
Yes.
And our emphasis was more around truth and lies and Jesus' whole thing of the enemy as the father of lies. But he is just the tip of the spear behind this whole spiritual realm, spiritual reality of gods and goddesses and angels and demons and spirituality, and God is in there. And you have been doing some fascinating work around this area. But I know you've been a little reluctant to get into it, of your own self-proclaimed skeptic of that whole thing. So just talk to us about that.
I grew up in Western, culture, Portland, and my default worldview is a materialist, non-supernatural anything. So I have to choose to actively think outside of that default. I don't find this easy to believe. Like, this isn't natural for me to. So I'm choosing to say, I think these biblical authors and Jesus have a way of viewing the world that they can see something that I guess I can't see. There's something I'm blind to about how they view reality, and that this is a really important part of understanding what's going on. And so I just want to encourage people who find this whole thing hard to believe, that's okay. That's okay. But I think it becomes a worldview that you have to learn how to adopt. And learn how to explain things that we see going on around us and in our own lives with a view to spiritual evil. And so what does that mean? But don't feel bad about being weirded out, because I think a lot of us are.
You're in good company. Okay, let's dive in. Let's just start from the beginning. The English word God.
Yes.
So when we talk about God, I think what comes into mind for me and most people is some kind of an all-wise, all-powerful, semi-personal creator. Not all people, but for the more Western, post-Christian kind of mindset. In Hebrew, the word is Elohim. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very different kind of word. So maybe talk to us about the opening line of the Bible. In the beginning, Elohim.
Yeah, that's right. So, the classic Jewish Christian confession about the nature of the scriptures is that God's revealed himself through human language, through these authors. And so that happened to be in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and Greek. And so what it means is that the language the Bible is written in, these words have connections of meaning that aren't identical to the words they get translated into in any language, English for us. So Elohim's a great example, right? It's one of the first words of the Bible, which you think would be crystal clear, God, right? And it turns out it's not.
It's not.
It's complicated. So what these Hebrew biblical authors have in mind when they use the word Elohim isn't the same thing as our English word capital G-O-D. So let's take the English word God out for a second. Let's just use Elohim.
Got it.
So if you tally up all the uses of this word in the Hebrew scriptures, we're talking over 2,700 times. You have all kinds of beings referred to. You have the one Elohim, who's the creator and king of all,
that we think of as capital G God.
Capital G God. And it's often clear because biblical authors will put the word the in front of Elohim. They'll call the God of Israel
or the Lord God
the
in
Elohim.
English,
or they'll use God's personal name revealed to Moses, Yahweh. So he's the chief Elohim who made everything. But there are also other beings called Elohim. And it can be the Elohim of Egypt that God's fighting in the Exodus story. God says in Exodus chapter 12. It can be the gods of any of the other nations, Elohim of Moab or Babylon or whatever. There can be other beings that God, we'll talk about this, God uses as his staff team that he processes decisions with.
Yes.
This is a category of creatures called Elohim.
Yep.
And then even the invisible presence of somebody who's deceased and yet to be resurrected, so we might call them spirits of the dead, can be called Elohim.
Wow.
Samuel.
Yes.
There's a story about Samuel.
That obscure story with
That's
Saul.
right. Or in Isaiah chapter 8, he talks about people consulting spirits of the dead, and he calls them Elohim.
Yeah.
So the word Elohim in Hebrew, the short way to summarize it is that it refers to a being who's an inhabitant of, and again, we lack good language for this. Where I'm at the moment is saying the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean the non-physical realm. In the Bible's conception of spiritual and physical, these are two distinct but overlapping realities, just like heaven and earth aren't separate, but they're overlapping. And so an Elohim is a being who is an inhabitant of the spiritual realm who can sometimes manifest in physical form. And there are many Elohim.
Yeah.
There's only one chief Elohim who's the creator of all.
So what about
But there are,
Isaiah and others when they write, there's no Elohim,
yes.
but one, or
that's right.
like the idea of false gods.
Yeah,
so
correct,
I heard that
correct.
language of false gods
Yeah.
for years. In my mind, I defaulted to non-entities.
Yeah,
False
that's
as
right.
in made up, mythic,
Yeah,
not
that's right.
true. So the god of Moab
Yeah.
is a myth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's
I
not
hear
what
that.
you're saying.
Yeah. What the biblical authors are clear is that idols, statues,
Yep.
that they are not Elohim. They're pieces of wood.
Right.
However, what they are not claiming in these texts about idols, Psalm 115 is a classic example, what they're not saying is those idols aren't connected to
Yes.
or in some way
An intermediary for-
an Elohim, a real spiritual being. This is why Paul the Apostle said to the Corinthians, don't go eat in these temples dedicated to Zeus or Apollo.
He didn't say because Zeus is a figment of your imagination.
No, he says because you could be in the presence of a daimonion, which is a Greek word for
Demigod
an Elohim, a
Yes.
lesser god. So they believe in the reality of spiritual beings.
So you're saying it's more about categorization than it is
Correct.
about
Yeah,
reality.
that's right.
So false gods aren't false in that they don't exist.
Yes, yeah.
They're false in that there's one creator.
Yes.
The others
Yeah,
are created.
That's right. Correct. Yeah, that's why Moses can say in Deuteronomy 10 that Yahweh, the God who rescued Israel out of Egypt, he's the Elohim of Elohim,
Got it.
which is like the Holy of Holies, the most holy space. He's the most God of gods.
Or like the Most High is another word for that, right? In the
That's
Old
right. Yeah,
Testament?
that's right.
Over
The
all
most-
the other gods.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right. So there's like about 3 or 4 passages that talk about no Elohim beside Yahweh, or don't have any other Elohim before me,
Yep.
is one of the 10 Commandments.
Yep.
What that's not saying is other Elohim don't exist. What it's saying is there's no Elohim that fits into the category of Yahweh, the chief Elohim.
Nobody on parallel with him.
Yeah. What they do have in common is that they are both spiritual beings.
Yes.
Which there's a populated spiritual universe in the biblical story, just as there's a populated human universe. And actually, there's an important relationship between the two.
Okay, so talk to me,
about.
let's move into that. Talk to me about what, in Bible nerd language is the divine council,
Yes.
which we read about through
Yeah.
the Old
Yep.
Testament
That's
and
right.
just skip over because
Yeah.
we imagine
Yeah.
my mind goes to that
Yeah.
crazy Liam Neeson movie from 10 years ago that was so bad. It was like ancient Greek. He plays Zeus or something. It was like a low point in his career.
Oh, wow.
It was not his
Liam.
best moment. He plays
Yeah.
Zeus or something.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Wow.
So my mind goes there. So,
see.
but that's all through the story of the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah, that's right.
What is the divine council?
Yeah. The reality and the role that these other spiritual beings play in the biblical story, the way it unfolds in the Bible isn't, actually the way most anything unfolds in the Bible isn't the way modern Westerners think of how a story works. It's meditation literature,
Got it.
which means that from the very beginning, it's assumed that you've already read through the whole thing.
Right.
And so there's all kinds of puzzles.
A lot of times.
A lot of times.
And put it to memory.
That's right. So there's already, there's loaded into the first stories of the Bible all kinds of puzzles and ambiguities that you won't understand even what they mean until you get later on.
Because you're meant to meditate on it.
Totally.
Read it slow,
That's
deliberate, think,
Yeah,
wait,
it's a
pick
kind
up a piece of the puzzle.
literature that's inviting a lifetime of rereading and discovery.
That Psalm 1 kind of
Totally.
meditates on
That's
the
right.
law
Yeah, Psalm
day
1
and
isn't
night.
just like a nice thing of read your Bible every day. It's
Yeah.
actually designed not to give up its secrets on the first reading.
So you're saying that when I read the Bible and I'm confused,
Yeah.
that's by intent.
Yes, I want to qualify. Well, we
Yes,
don't have time to
no, I know what you're
qualify.
saying,
Yeah.
but-
It's an invitation
Yes.
to keep reading.
It's specifically designed not as a quick read.
That's right.
But to get you to read and to read
That's right.
slowly.
And so a classic example is on page 1, where God says, "Let us make human in our image." Who's the us? Right? It's a classic question, right?
Yeah.
Jewish and Christian readers for thousands of years. So you actually have already been given a clue as to who that us is before that point in Genesis 1. But as the story unfolds, you get more and more clarification about that. And it's what the biblical poets in Psalm 82 or Psalm 89 will call the divine council, the council of Elohim. So on page 1, God creates the sun, moon, and stars. Actually, the word sun and moon is never used. It's just called the lamps.
Wow.
It's the same word as the lampstand in the tabernacle. So God creates a heavenly lamp, a bigger one and a lesser one,
Yep.
and the kochavim, the stars. And what he tells these creatures to do is to rule the skies.
Wow.
Then parallel to that is he says, let us make, let us
Humanity to rule
to rule over the land.
the land.
So Genesis 1 gives us this image of the celestial realm, which is under Yahweh. He's above the heavens, so
Yep.
to speak, as the ruler over all. So under Yahweh are two delegated authorities, the celestial rulers,
Yep.
the lights and the stars, and then the terrestrial rulers.
And lights and stars, I've always just read that as the sun and the moon
Yeah,
and the
totally.
stars.
That's right.
And you're saying that behind that was this idea of spiritual
Yeah, that's
creatures.
right. Every single mention of the stars in the Hebrew Bible refers to them as creatures. The biblical authors envision these as creatures, beings,
Yeah.
like spiritual beings,
Yes.
celestial beings. And this is common in the ancient world, and it's common for biblical authors, but they even tell you, right, when they're first introduced in Genesis 1, that there's more than meets the eye here, because the first word in Genesis 1, verse 14, is these creatures are called otot in Hebrew, symbols. It's the Hebrew word for symbol.
Yeah.
So the sun, the big lamp, the little lamp, and the stars, which rule, are symbols for humans. And in the Bible, this word sign or symbol is a real thing that is itself just a signpost or a pointer to the greater reality to which it points. And so from the human perspective, we look up at these glorious creatures
Yep.
and are to view them as symbols to some greater...
So the fireball that
Yeah.
our planet is going around
Yeah, totally.
is a fireball.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's a symbol
That's right.
of a greater
Yeah, that's right.
reality.
So it's so easy to translate into a modern conception of the universe in that a theistic view of the world, believing that there is a beautiful
Mind.
mind behind all of this, is that the sun is a ball of gas that we are rotating around. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a different conception of the world, but the theological idea is the same. Namely that someone who believes in a creator, for them the sun is itself a sign and symbol to a greater source
reality.
of beauty and power,
Yeah.
the beautiful mind behind
So
that.
at first it sounds just wacky.
It sounds crazy, but you actually...
But it's not actually.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
So you're saying this
Yes.
idea of
Summarize
other
what-
spiritual
Yeah.
realities is,
Correct.
I mean, is literally on
It's
Page 1, verse 14.
God's creating these beings.
And then you get to let us.
Correct.
And of course, who is God talking to?
That's right.
And you're saying it's these other beings.
Yes, that's right. So these other beings, the other Elohim, the other spiritual beings, are depicted as they're embedded in the dome, in the sky dome, the conception of the world in Genesis
the ancient
1.
worldview,
That's right. And then Yahweh's temple and throne room is above the heavens of the heavens. And so translate that into image of a court, a king, a royal throne room. And so you get descriptions. The easiest place to go is a narrative in the book of 1 Kings, where the prophet Micaiah.
Crazy story.
It's a crazy story. But he has this vision of God's presence, and what he sees is Yahweh on a throne, and he's surrounded by the hosts of heaven, the host of the skies. Right? That's the things that were made.
The spiritual beings.
The spiritual beings. And then what you see is God has a decision. He's going to make a decision about what to do with the really bad king of Israel. And he actually lets them participate in the divine decision-making process.
Right.
So he
So he has an end in mind.
He has an end in mind.
The death of Ahab, who's
Correct.
wreaking havoc.
That's right.
But he's open to suggestions around
That's right.
the means.
And he accepts a suggestion.
Which, by the way, that's I feel like that's a whole sermon right there.
Oh,
about
totally.
Just like
Yeah, that's right.
God's will,
That's right.
decision-making,
That's
our role
That's right.
in God's
Okay,
end. And
all
means.
right.
But let's not
so,
go there.
So here's the deal. Here's what's happening on page 1 then. The God of the Bible wants to share his universe with other creatures. That's the depiction. And he wants to share it in such a way that his rule and authority over it is mediated by these delegated creatures.
And that's the key idea. Celestial and terrestrial.
Right.
Spiritual,
beings.
let's call it that for now, and human beings.
And human beings, that's right.
Because God has set the universe up in such a way that he wants to run it through intermediaries.
That's right. Yeah, so that what creation becomes is a symphony of unified wills who submit to each other in love. If we want to get Trinitarian about it, which is where it's all going.
Which is where it's all, and
That's
still is
what's
yet to
happening,
go.
yeah. And still is yet to go in the story.
Okay, so
That's
let's talk about what went wrong with God's original, or right, with God's
Yep.
original.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
just to clarify,
Yes.
Go to any reference to the stars in the rest of the Bible, and what you'll see they're all doing is referring back to this depiction of delegated spiritual beings who rule the world on God's behalf.
Which, again, we already get that idea from the human thing.
Yeah,
Adam
that's
and
right.
Eve are there to
Yeah,
rule.
that's exactly
Delegated
right.
authority,
That's
kings,
correct.
queens, priests
That's
over.
correct. That's
So
right.
you're just saying this is going on in the heavens as well as on earth.
That's right. The relationship between heaven and earth is a connected
There's an
one
overlap.
and a mirrored reality.
And this divine council is
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
inner
Yeah.
grouping of spiritual beings.
It is to Yahweh in the heavenlies what humans are to Yahweh on the earthly realm.
Okay,
That's right.
but something goes wrong. We know the Genesis story
Yeah.
with the human beings. There's a rebellion against God's
Yes.
vision for human flourishing.
Yeah, that's right.
And then something also goes wrong
Yes.
in the heavenlies, right?
Correct.
So talk to us about, what in Christian tradition is called the fall.
Yeah.
Not so much the terrestrial side of it as much as
Well, but they're joined.
Yeah.
So you get a talking snake on page 3 of the Bible.
that's there.
And
Which again, at first is crazy, and then when
Yeah.
you get into the ancient worldview, it's so punk rock and rad, and
totally.
mine
Yeah.
and true
Yeah,
and
that's
beautiful.
right. So the Hebrew word for this being is nachash, the nachash. And it also happens to be the word for diviner or sorcerer. And it also is related to the word for shining or brightness. It's connected to the word bronze. Nachoshet, nachash. Nachoshet is bronze, which is always
I'm
one
nodding
of the
my
most
head
sparkling things.
like I know Hebrew well enough to know what you're talking about. but-
Biblical authors often use vocabulary because of the connections through puns and word plays and associations. And that's just a normal way of how they write.
Yeah.
They're doing it all the time. So when you see a beast of the field, a snake, but who's talking, Like, it's not like ancient biblical authors were somehow more primitive and gullible than we are.
No, they're
that
brilliant.
They thought talking snakes were normal.
Right. And Genesis 1 is some of the most sophisticated literature
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
ever.
That's right.
Right? Yeah.
So a talking snake.
So it's not like, well, now we know snakes don't talk.
Yeah,
And
but they didn't know that back then. Of course, they know that snakes don't talk. That's why it's
in the
bizarre.
story. Yeah.
It's bizarre. So there's more than meets the eye to this creature. So what is it? Well, it's a being who wants to convince the human rulers that the Creator's holding out on them, that they actually have the right to take on a role of authority and rule and knowing good and evil that's greater than what God's given to them.
To join the divine council.
That's right. Yeah. What he says is, you can become Elohim. That's what he says.
Wow.
And whether that means capital G God or spiritual beings.
Yes.
The point is they were made as terrestrial rulers.
Made for one thing, you can become another.
Correct. So what they're tempted to do by this being, and so that you're just meant to infer, what is this creature?
Yes.
That's trying to get these human creatures to overstep their bounds. This seems like a creature that's overstepping its bounds. And it turns out that God destines the creature to defeat and humiliation and destruction.
Yeah.
God says that from the line of the humans is going to come a human who's going to crush this being at right on its
the
head.
Genesis 3:15.
Genesis 3:15. That's right. That's right.
Some would say the first kind of nod toward
That's correct.
the Messiah.
Yeah, that's right. So right here on page 1, you get the celestial rulers, terrestrial rulers. Both are partners that God wants to employ
To rule
in the ordering
the cosmos,
and beautifying of
and to
creation.
spread Eden out to the far
it?
corners of
You got it?
reality.
And it's precisely at a rebellion of heaven and earth.
Both.
Yes, Genesis 3 is both a fall narrative of the celestial powers.
Both heaven and
represented
earth
by
rebel against God's vision.
That's right, yep. And so the depiction of the human story after this, we'll come back to Genesis 3:15 in a second, the snake crusher, but is the narratives in Genesis 1 to 11, which are strange for any modern reader.
Yep.
But they're just playing out the same thing. You get, the next story is about a guy named Cain, who also faced a beastly temptation. He's tempted by a beast too.
Yes.
Except the beast is called by the word sin, and it's in him. It's a beast inside of him that wants to eat him. So the first...
It's crouching at your door.
Yeah, that's right.
Predator
yeah,
language.
That's right. That's right. So you get this image of there is a being, a spiritual reality of beings that are in rebellion in a way that mirrors the human rebellion, but that evil is also at work within, evil without and evil within. And the fact that the first and second generation, Adam and Eve and then Cain, both face the evil
beast.
without and the beast without and the beast within.
The predator crouching at the door.
Yes, and then what Cain gives into that urge and he murders his brother. Cain's descendants go on, and the seventh of Cain's lineage is an even worse murderer than his great-great-great-great-grandfather. And then they build a city, and then it all leads up to this building of Babylon.
Yep.
And so the narrative is trying to create this arc here of the human rebellion, but it's also tracing the spiritual rebellion.
Yep.
And that crazy story about this Genesis 6, I don't know if you know it. You probably do and have avoided it ever since you read it for the first time. But it's a story about the sons of God, the sons of Elohim, spiritual beings, who also cross their boundaries. Humans cross their boundaries. They cross their boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's a complicated story. We don't have to get into it. But it's another rebellion in the heavenlies. So the Bible's trying to tell us that the world is the way that it is, not just because of human stupidity, but that there is a dimension of reality that's not easy for us to see, and that it works on both the individual level, like the Cain story,
in us,
how I deal with anger and resentment, right?
jealousy, envy,
But also it's working on a corporate level, the building of whole cities.
And cultures.
And cultures that comes under the name Babylon.
Which, I mean, if you think about an ISIS or a Nazi Germany, it's hard to explain that away based on just the secular human you know what I mean? Human beings at that level.
I mean, you can. You can just say the Third Reich, the rise of the Third Reich. right?
But the Third Reich was the pinnacle of human civilization at the time.
Yeah.
Science, technology,
Yeah,
art,
yeah,
theology,
yeah,
music.
totally. Yeah,
and
that's
within a
right.
few decades, the
That's
whole
right.
thing is contorted.
So it's a recent historical example, and it's helpful, but it's so extreme
Yes.
that I don't.
Maybe it's not the
I
best.
don't know. It's a good example, but it's just one example.
Low-hanging fruit,
The
yeah.
point is that humans can organize ourselves in corporate entities and begin both creating and being created by stories about who we are, about what's wrong with
What's
us,
right.
about what our real problems are, about what are our limits, and what are the boundaries that we ought to cross, or what did our ancestors think were the boundaries we shouldn't cross. But we know, of course,
Wow.
that we're made to become Elohim. And so we begin to redefine good and evil on an individual and corporate level.
Yep.
And what the biblical authors want us to see is that there's more than just humans at work.
Yeah.
There's what they'll call the powers.
Yes.
So rebels of the divine council,
Yep.
who are both participating in the destruction and ruin of God's good world, just like humans are. And that's the key to how the biblical narrative works. There's a two-tiered mirror storyline progressing through the whole biblical narrative.
Yes.
Which is why when you get to the prophets of the Old Testament, when they look at Babylon, man, okay, so this is where maybe Nazi
Yes.
Germany comes in.
Is it great? Yeah.
So the Neo-Babylonian Empire that took over the ancient world, right, in the 7th century BC. I mean, we're talking. It was a horrific time.
If you're not
in
a
human
Babylonian.
history. If you're not a Babylonian.
If you're Babylonian, it's the peak
Yeah.
of civilization.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're not a Babylonian,
Totally. That's
bad
right.
news.
That's right. So we're talking about an imperial army that stormed the ancient Near East, would indiscriminately just slaughter whole towns and villages, enslave the rest of the population, and relocate them to a town that they just conquered and just mix and match.
Yep.
I mean, they're trying to erase
Yep.
every people group except themselves. And so when the biblical authors see this kind of evil, Isaiah chapters 13 and 14 are a classic example. And where they reach is describing a human king in terms of a cosmic spiritual rebellion.
Yeah.
They see a spiritual rebel and a human rebel
Together.
And this is the biblical way of seeing
That
reality.
behind
That's
this
right, that's
human
right.
evil, political evil,
That's right.
injustice, there
Yeah.
is some kind of a dark animating energy behind
That's
that.
right. And the biblical authors don't use this worldview to excuse human beings, like, oh, a devil made
Yeah.
them do it. That's totally not it's that we are partnering, unbeknownst to ourselves, we buy into these cultural systems or these personal stories of redefining good and evil by our own wisdom. And without even knowing it, we can become partners with forces of evil and chaos that are so beyond our ability to comprehend. And we can even think that we're doing the right thing,
Wow.
when in fact we are redefining evil as good. That's what the biblical authors want us to see.
Yes.
And so let's just pause. That's so profound.
Yes.
That's a really profound way of seeing
And
the world.
That's the truth. And often we get hung up
Yeah.
on the Nephilim or the
Yeah,
flood
yeah,
or
totally.
the talking
Yeah,
snake.
that's right. That's
And
the essence.
We don't have time to go into it now.
Yeah, yeah.
Listen to your recent podcast does some of this work.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
I think as jarring as Genesis 1 through 11 and the whole Bible is to
Yeah.
our Western secular worldview with the talking snake and
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
sun as the symbol,
Yeah.
it was most likely even more jarring to the ancient reader because the way that it's
Yes.
this punk rock polemic against
Yeah,
the
that's right.
Babylonian worldview and the gods. So
That's
don't
right.
have time to go into that.
Yeah.
Listen to the podcast, get
Yeah.
more.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
what started out for me as one of my biggest questions about the Bible, and by questions I mean like obstructions or obstacles
Hang-ups,
to
yeah.
trust in the Bible, hang up,
Yeah, yeah.
has become for me one of my favorite parts of the Bible as I see the truth embedded in it
Yeah.
and what it would have read like to the ancient reader.
Yes,
But
yes.
I love how you're distilling it down to the
Yes.
truth at the core of it
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
bedrock,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's
So okay, so running through this library of scripture and this unfolding story of which the climax is Jesus,
Yes,
right?
yes.
You're saying is this mirror rebellion in heaven and on earth.
Yes.
That often the heaven part is categorized by this rubric of spiritual warfare, which is not language used in the New Testament, but the idea is all the way through.
Yeah, a conflict.
Yes.
A cosmic conflict.
Cosmic conflict.
Yep.
And then central to that is
Yeah.
this figure that
Yeah.
Jesus has much to say about of the devil or their other names.
Correct.
Talk to us about, run us from kind of Genesis 3:15, the serpent crusher,
Totally.
up to Jesus, where
Yeah.
we've been the last few weeks.
Yeah, so
the
this is the way biblical literature communicates. It's very different. It's its own category of literature.
Yes.
And I believe guided by God's Spirit to be what it is. But it's something that we have to learn and adjust to how it communicates. One of the main ways it communicates is through, you can call it literary design or cycles of patterns. But there's really just a few basic ideas being worked out in cyclical patterns over and over and over and
This
over
angle,
again.
that angle, this author, that viewpoint,
Totally,
that.
that's right. And so just like the hope for the Messiah is pointed towards through a diversity of images and characters and stories.
Yeah, you used the language earlier of a mosaic.
Of a mosaic, yeah.
Yeah,
Think
it's
of or a photo mosaic.
One prophet has this
That's right.
tile, another author
Yeah,
has
that's
this
right.
tile,
That's
this
right.
David is this tile.
That's right.
And then together you start to get this
You
composite.
finish the Hebrew Bible and you're like, we
picture.
need a new human, a new Adam, and we need a new Moses, a new David. We need the ultimate Passover sacrifice.
need a high
We
priest,
need
yeah.
And those are all one thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're all different pieces of one
pointing forward
portrait.
to Jesus.
Correct. So, and if you look at how Jesus and the apostles read and talk about, you can see that's how they think of it, how they talk about the Old Testament. The same goes for this portrait of evil, spiritual evil. It's an accumulating set of stories and characters and images and places
Mosaic.
that begin to make up a mosaic silhouette or portrait of the evil one. And so the snake is the first one right there.
Mm-hmm.
In the next story of Cain, it's sin, which is an animal lurking inside. In the stories that go on, it's humans who give in to sin become agents of the serpent. And so you get, Nimrod.
Yeah.
Genesis 10.
It's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a
there.
whole rabbit hole, but he's the founder of Babylon on page 10 of the Bible. And then Babylon becomes a whole story of people who, just like that snake, want to ascend to the heavens.
Yep.
They want to build a human kingdom that breaks the boundary of heaven and earth to become Elohim. And so just even that set of stories, is that a human bad guy or a spiritual bad guy? Well, it's humans who are participating, unknowingly even,
Yep.
with something
And even
much more sinister
Jesus
behind them.
in John 8, where we've been,
Yes.
is getting to that.
Totally.
And with the
Yeah,
Pharisees,
that's right.
you are of your father, the devil.
That's right.
You're his
Yes.
children. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
that's
our,
right.
all back to Genesis 3, right?
So-
the
so-
seed of the
that's
serpent
right. So
are the Pharisees,
Totally.
which are the
It's-
religious people.
So from page 3, it's a tale of two seeds. And it doesn't mean physical genetic lineage.
Yes,
It's-
because the Pharisees
that's
aren't
right.
descendant of a snake.
I'm still looking for the right term, but it's a spiritual lineage. Right?
Yes, yeah.
Because Cain, who's the son of Adam and
You
Eve,
stand in this line of the story.
becomes a seed of the serpent by giving in to the evil within. And so as you go throughout then the rest of the Hebrew Bible, the portrait of the evil one and the evil ones just continues to develop. And so you get these rebel spiritual beings who participate. They're called the sons of Elohim, or the sons of God in our English translations. They're sometimes called the powers. They're the hosts of heaven.
Principalities.
And then
You have demons in the New Testament.
yeah,
right?
totally. Actually, that word appears in the Hebrew Bible, shadim. So, and what these are beings who are working on an individual and corporate level to participate and aggravate the cosmic rebellion, resulting in the world that you and I inhabit.
Now, when Jesus talks about...
So that's this one seed.
That's
line.
one seed.
The promise given on page 3 in Genesis 3:15 is that there's a human seed who will not only not give in to spiritual evil, but will overcome and defeat it at its source.
Yep.
Like
Deal with the real problem.
Deal with the real problem at its root. And then this whole human lineage that you follow gets traced on through Abraham, and he's pretty awesome, except when he's not when he's not acting like a snake.
Aren't we all?
Totally. When he's not deceiving and lying and abusing immigrants, he's pretty good. And his descendants are no better, right? Jacob's main name means deceiver.
Yep.
And then the sons of Israel, the strugglers, those who struggle with those who struggle with God. That's what Israel means, struggles with God. And so the story goes on, and you're just like, oh, Moses, he's pretty good, except when he's not. David, he's pretty good, except when he's. And so you leave the Hebrew Bible going, you know what we need around here? We need a new human who won't give in to spiritual evil, who will somehow overcome the evil one, but also in a way to rescue the people who are captive to Babylon. To the evil one and its social manifestation in Babylon.
Or would have been Roman Empire.
That's right. Babylon becomes a symbol to refer to any and all human cultures that turn them, their values
Nazi Germany
into
is
God.
Babylon, and the Roman Empire is Babylon.
That's right. And America's Babylon. I mean,
100%.
Totally. So you walk to page 1 of the New Testament, and you see Jesus declaring the kingdom of God, that God is taking back his rule of the world through a merging of the divine and human.
Yep.
Which
has been the storyline.
Totally. Yeah, that's right. That's what
all of a sudden the incarnation is like,
right.
Of course.
That's exactly right. So this is what really I began to open my eyes to this, is there is so much I couldn't account for in the story of the Gospels within a materialist, non-supernatural worldview.
Yeah, is it Luke's line, the reason the Son of Man came is to destroy the works of the devil? That's the reason.
Right. Yeah. And so it's crystal clear to Jesus that his enemy isn't human kingdoms. And while
because he's right under the nose, right under the boot of the Roman Empire.
Totally.
Which again, peak of civilization. If you're a Roman, nowhere else in the world to be. If you're not a Roman.
And Jerusalem, the holy city of David, is being run by people who have all given in to participating in the Roman power system. And so what Jesus does was he starts this populist cell movement in the villages of Galilee.
Yeah. But he's not protesting the local garrison.
No, that's right.
And he's not raising an army to go to war.
No, he walks into a village, and spiritual evil freaks out.
Yeah.
The stories of Jesus' exorcisms, his healings are often freeing people from
as a blurred line, right, between
evil.
exorcism and the healing.
And we might separate those, healing versus exorcism. It's the same activity. And it's totally paired with integrating Matthew and the prostitutes and the sinners into God's family.
Wow.
And healing those who are impure and bodies riddled with skin disease and decay, who couldn't go to the temple, but Jesus invites them into his little temple presence that's traveling around now.
Healing.
And so Jesus, he's so fully living in the world set up by the Hebrew Bible that he sees his true enemy. He'll go announce the kingdom of God in a city, and demons are cast out and people are healed. And what he'll say in Luke chapter 10 is, I'm seeing the Satan fall from heaven. So when people are freed from captivity to the internal Babylon and external Babylon and give their allegiance to Jesus and his new humanity and his love, the evil ones are being dethroned, so to speak, over the rule of their lives.
And have lost power.
That's exactly
and
right.
And lost authority.
That's right. So Jesus sees himself and presents himself as the human seed of the woman of Genesis 3:15, who's not fighting humans.
That we've been waiting for since page 3.
He's dealing with the snake on its head. And so the word Satan is the Hebrew word that's one of the images to describe spiritual evil in the Hebrew Bible. It's not a name. Just like Elohim is not a name.
It's a title.
It's a title that means the accuser or the opposer, and which is a role that this being can play in the divine council.
Yes.
Which is what you see this figure doing in the book of Job. And also in the book of Zechariah. And it's what he's doing with Jesus in the testing him in the desert. He's putting what's happening with Jesus in the desert is a replay of the garden. It's spiritual evil offering a human, the human Jesus, a chance to rule on his own terms. And Jesus, of course, is made and destined to rule, just like humans are on page 1.
Yeah.
But Jesus, instead of seizing authority, as Paul says in Philippians 2, he doesn't seize for his own advantage what is already rightly his own.
Yeah.
Rather, he empties himself and gives his life for others.
Defeating evil through self-sacrificial death.
That's right. And so that's he defeats evil by letting evil defeat him through its human agents who think they're doing good. Right? Like the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and Pilate think they're doing
protecting Israel from blasphemy.
Totally, yeah.
But and in the end, there's no more Roman Empire.
And that's right.
People are following Jesus all around the world.
Yeah, that's right. So this gets into many other themes, but I think the point is this is Jesus' way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
This is the apostles' way of seeing the world. When Paul looks out at Christians being persecuted or himself sitting in prison in Ephesians, right? He'll write that you guys, our enemy is never another human. It's never another human.
Wow.
And
talk about a message we need to hear right now.
Yes, totally. It's realities that are hard for us to see, often invisible, but not always, especially because the whole point of this evil is that it's a mirror of heaven and earth. And so we can become agents and participants in evil without even knowing it. But humans are never the ultimate problem. It's something darker and more mysterious lurking underneath. That's Paul's view of the world. It's corporate, it's individual. So profound.
That's it.
Yeah, man. So I could go, I could
know,
go on.
I know.
So get me going. And
I hate to cut you off.
Yeah, totally.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
to shift gears,
Yes.
or to kind of land the plane from this idea, which is fascinating, which is hard to believe, which is hard to get your head around as a Westerner, where does this land for you? You live a few blocks from here. You follow Jesus on the streets of this city. How does this interface and interact with our day-to-day life as we think about the week ahead, as we frame our life with Jesus in this city?
Yeah. Where it hasn't put me, I'm not saying this is good, I'm just saying it hasn't put me in a mindset where I'm now scared of like ghosts and spirits again.
Yeah.
That's actually not where my mind goes. I'm really trying to let the story of Genesis 3 about redefining good and evil to transcend what I think are my limits that I ought to be able to transcend and that will benefit me, even Genesis 4, if it's at the expense of my brother, of his life or well-being. And so that battle, right? So let me just be even more clear. It's the battle to do what is best for me and to redefine good and evil for my own convenience, comfort, and benefit, and at the expense of the people around me. I'm guessing I'm not alone in that struggle.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Tim.
And in my
not a temptation for me.
In my family, there's that little world that's happening. It's happening in my city. It's happening in are you with me?
Yeah.
Just the expanding circles. And every one of those is a realm where that same conflict is taking place. And I think the biblical authors
it's the same temptation.
It's the same deal. And so...
And that is spiritual warfare,
and
you're
that's
saying.
Spiritual warfare. That's exactly right.
The temptation
That's
to
right.
decide for myself, good from evil.
That's right.
Do what's best for me at the expense of somebody else,
That's right.
regardless of the ramifications.
And then we create individual and corporate cultural narratives about those good
To justify
and evil
it.
value sets. And then all of a sudden, you get decades in, and what was inconceivable to our great-grandparents is now perfectly right and normal to us.
It's the new normal.
That's right. And so I think that's
As Isaiah would say, good is evil and evil is good.
Yeah, or in Apostle Paul's language, captive to the evil one.
Yeah.
I always thought that was so weird.
Yeah.
But if you really let these narratives start to affect your way of seeing the world, I am captive to the cultural narratives of Portland. I totally am. I have to actively resist.
And you need to be set free.
I need to be set free from from my addiction to like eating out too much. No, I'm totally serious.
Yes.
The amount of money, you know.
I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about. But
Yeah, or the convenient overlooking that I do of my neighbors without homes.
Yeah.
You know, in all over my city and their situation. which is a complex one. There's all kinds of things where I'm redefining good and evil to make my life more convenient.
Yeah.
And for my own well-being
or perceived well-being.
Perceived well-being.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so for me, that's it, man. That's the pastoral traction.
That's where the rubber.
It's a personal
meets
traction
the
of
road.
all of
Yeah.
this. And so there are, I've only had one encounter with what I think was a personal evil being hijacking a person, and so once, and I'm 41. That's happened once in 41 years, but every day, I'm faced with a conflict about redefining good and evil.
Yeah.
And that, I think, in the biblical authors and Jesus' mind, is just as much where the spiritual cosmic battle is happening as in stuff from The Exorcist.
Yes.
And
So do we give in to that and
Yeah.
participate in the rebellion?
Totally.
Or do we resist
Yeah.
and participate in the healing?
Yeah, that's right. So talk about it. Even if you think it's weird, I think you can say to your neighbors, this is a coherent way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
And of explaining why our world is the way it is. And it's a worldview, it's the kingdom of God worldview that I think can give followers of Jesus leverage over against the culture in which they find themselves to be able to critique the stories and the value systems that I think we're often captive to. But so there you go.
That's it.
Yeah.
Tim, we are so grateful for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Hope to have you in the flesh next year when you're back on the circuit. But either way,
Cheers.
we love you. We respect you. We thank God for you.
Yeah.
Grace and peace.
Pray for me, and I'll pray for you.
Yeah.
That we can be free from the evil one.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.